Welcome back, guys, and welcome to episode 1 of the E36 build series. I'm excited about this, not only because it means I get to put my car that I've had for about 15 years back on the road, but because you guys expressed a lot of interest in seeing it, and I think it's gonna do some really big favors for this channel. We're gonna get a whole new build's worth of content, and I think it's gonna mean richer content, longer content, more of everything, and I'm excited that you guys expressed interest in seeing something other than just Ferrari stuff here, because I'm all about all sorts of different cars, and getting to share more of that with you guys is exciting, to say the least. Now, before we actually dive into the car, I do want to answer a few questions that I know are gonna pop up. And the first one is, no, the Ferrari's not getting moved to the back burner. It's not gonna get done any more slowly. The E36 is just filling in some gaps. The Ferrari is the #1 priority, and I've got a pretty good track record of actually finishing my builds. This car is no different. So don't worry, this isn't going anywhere. We're not losing steam or momentum on it. The second you're gonna ask is, what's happening with the truck? And the answer is, I'm saving it for once I'm done with the Ferrari, or at least far enough along where I know I'm gonna finish the car when I want it finished. Third, what's going on with the Model A back there? I have no idea. I'm still waiting to get my engine back, been waiting for a hot minute. Eventually, we'll have some content for that thing, but right now it's just a waiting game. And last, what am I doing with the M3? Got no idea, I might sell it, who knows? Now, with all that stuff out of the way, let's get the E36 down and see what we're working with. Now, while Khalil and I pull the E30 out and the Model A out so we can actually get the E36 down from the lift where it's been parked for the last, I don't know how long, I'll shamelessly say, if you guys are liking this channel, if you want to see where the E36 build goes, or you just want to show some support, subscribe or leave me some feedback, because that helps this channel grow, and the more it grows, the more I can focus on making content like this. With the cover pulled back, it's nice to actually lay eyes on this thing again, because honestly, I don't see it all that often, even though it lives in the shop with me. It's really only when I pull cars down and have to rearrange things. But seeing it with a fresh set of eyes and motivation to actually work on it for the first time in I don't know how many years feels really good. Khalil's been spending his free time at the shop and has been really bearing down, adding some extra motivation. So it definitely feels like the right time to do this. So, what are we actually working with here? Well, it's my 1993 325 IS, and I've had this car since I was 17 years old. And as for its current state, it was fully repainted 2 years ago, but I haven't really touched it whatsoever since, because it still needs a lot of work, as you guys can see. It's pretty much disassembled in every other way. But this car has got really good bones. I'm the second owner. It's got about 125,000 miles on the chassis, and more importantly, about 25,000 miles on the S54 driveline, including the 6-speed that I started swapping in back in 2007. This thing's been a project for a long time. It's had its ups and downs, but it's finally ready to be rebuilt. So there's an idea of what we're working with, the bones of the E36. They're solid, and I'm excited to be taking steps forward on it. But before we actually lay all the parts out and see what the next number of episodes are actually gonna look like, let me give those of you that aren't familiar with this car a brief history lesson. This story begins with this photo right here, the very first photo I ever took with a camera, which means something if you know me as an automotive photographer, which is what I've built most of my name on for the last decade or more. This E36 photo shoot was all the way back in November of 2006. I have a handful of images from it, which you guys are seeing here, and it's definitely a humble reminder that we all start somewhere. On top of birthing my photographic career, this car's responsible for a lot of other firsts for me as well. I'm sharing all of this because I want everybody to understand just how important this car is to me. It holds a ton of sentimental value, and while I don't really believe in the concept of quote-unquote forever cars, this one might as well be one. It wasn't my first car. That claim belongs to a 1997 Chevy S10, but otherwise, this is the first car I ever did much of anything with. It was the first vehicle I went to a car meet with, the first car I modified, the first car I ever went to any sort of driving event, so on and so forth. As my automotive enthusiasm grew, so did my goals for the car, and in 2008, my father and I drove down to Atlanta, Georgia, and picked up most of a wrecked E46 M3, and that kicked off the process of S54 swapping this car. a process that took cumulatively about 3 years to finish because at the time it was one of the very first S54 swaps ever undertaken. For the BMW nerds out there, this thing runs on a factory E46 ECU with an E46 cluster, an E46 keyring, E46 EWS, so on and so forth. All of which I would have been unable to do without the help of my friend Eric Rumbaugh and of course the support from the guys over at Fluid Motor Union in Chicago who helped wrap up the swap. By the time this car was actually finished, I'm sure there were other cars out there that had accomplished the same, one of them being Rob Levinson of UUC and his Z3M swapped E36. But past that, it was special enough that it was offered a cover on Performance BMW magazine, although I turned it down because I wanted to wait until I felt the car was truly worthy of such a reward. Over the years, the car continued to evolve and has always been kind of heralded as one of the OG E36s, at least by a select few of us old farts in the E36 community. But it was moving to California that eventually killed this car. It sat outside, the sun destroyed it, and daily driving it for a brief period of time just wore it out. If that weren't enough, eventually a Saturn pulled out in front of me, causing the front end to get crunched up a bit, and I finally parked the car until 2 years ago, when I decided it was time to fix it, and I had Colin at Axis Paintworks fully repaint it. Enough talking about the past of the car, let's look at what we're going to be doing and what a 5-year stockpile of parts actually looks like. So maybe saying 5 years of parts sounds a little bit crazier than it is in reality, but it's still a pretty decent chunk of parts. I've been hanging on to these for quite some time and I'm ready to finally put them on the car. Let's actually take a look at them. I'll show you what I got. The first thing on the list is the rear end of the car, and I've got a brand new, fully powder-coated, reinforced subframe to go in this thing, as well as a fully rebuilt triple clutch 391 limited slip, which should really change the way the car drives. Pairing that with all new reinforcements for the bottom of the car, subframe bushings, trailing arm bushings, spherical bearings, diff mounts, and camber arms. It's a similar story for the front end too. I've got tubular front SLR control arms, which is for their track spec setup, spherical bearings, new tie rod ends, the whole nine. The suspension itself is getting a major upgrade in the form of some custom ordered H&R Motorsport coilovers, and these things are awesome. They're really lightweight with aluminum shock bodies. They've got custom spring rates, custom valving, the whole nine, including small details like rear spring jacks that'll keep the springs seated during suspension articulation. I mean, this is a really cool setup and I'm excited to get it on the car. We've also got wheels to put on this thing, or at least some parts for some wheels. This is a set of 17-inch Fixie FM5s that we're going to need to find some rim halves for, and ideally we'll build them out to a 17 by 9-inch square setup. I'm thinking brush centers with polished lips, wrapped in 255 Nittos if we can fit them under the fenders in a square setup. There's also several other boxes, these two and many more, with a slew of other parts in them as well. All new gaskets, finished pieces, that kind of stuff, but we'll go over those here in a few. For good measure, let's take a look at the car with this camera instead of the fancy one. Let's see the non-glamorous shots of our canvas. So as mentioned, the car has been fully repainted and bodyworked, although we do have some panel gaps we've got to sort out, by my buddy Colin at Axis Paintworks, and he did a beautiful job. I mean, this car looks better than the day it rolled off the showroom floor, and it is repainted in its factory color of granite silver metallic. We did a slick top conversion on it, added the LTW wing, M bumpers because it is just a 325, and have really taken the exterior as far as we can, aside from adding back all of the pieces we've taken off for the paint job. It was a full glass out job. As far as exterior trimmings, I do have all new rubber and gaskets and seals for the car. Every single piece and bit of trimming I have brand new. We've got door moldings, bumper trim, I've got brand new side skirts, mirrors, window trim, door gaskets, window seals, the whole nine. I really wanted to do this job correctly and, make it the nicest car that I possibly could. When it comes to the interior of the car, it's the biggest pitfall. It looks like you would expect a crappy E36 to look because E36 interiors just fall apart. and I have removed the pieces as they have failed over time. So the biggest thing left to do is track down a complete, really nice interior. I'd like it to be perfect. I do have a slick top headliner to put in now that we have converted the top. That needs to be redone, and that'll get done at the same time. Overall, the interior is probably going to be the toughest aspect of the build that remains, at least in my opinion. That's mostly just because I don't have any of the components that I'd like to make it as nice as I'd like it to be, versus the rest of the car, we do have most of what we need sitting around. As far as the labor intensity of the build, that's going to be underneath because this thing does need all of these chassis reinforcements. It does need the floor welded up at the subframe and things like that. It really needs an overhaul because although it does have coilovers on it, none of the bushings have ever been changed, and it's at about 120,000 miles. I am the second owner. So lots of maintenance and overhaul work to do there. Under the hood, we have the S54, as you guys now know. It's pretty dirty under here, partially from getting body worked and partially from sitting around for years and years. I want to do an overhaul under here, replace all of the hoses and, seals, things like that. I might put an air intake plenum on it, maybe a carbon one. We'll have to see. We've got all new lighting to put on the car, new trim as mentioned. I've got a new front lip, fog lights to put on this thing. Mechanically, it runs really well. We've got to sort one small problem that it has once it warms up, but this car really does scream, and I'm excited to get back behind the wheel of it. The driveline out of this thing at this point is sitting at about 25,000 miles. It came out of an 05 M3 as mentioned before and was basically new at the time, 19,000 miles when we swapped it in. There you guys have it. That's your history lesson. This is my E36 101. I hope you guys are interested still. We've got a pretty good series of parts to put on it, and hopefully we're gonna add a lot to this list. I'm excited to see how far we can take this car because it needs all sorts of other stuff too. It's gonna need, all new brakes. I'd like to do the whole interior while we're at it, update some things on the engine, maybe add some power to it, the whole nine. I wanna make this car the best that I can. That's kind of the MO around here. Anyways, if you guys are still interested in the project, we'll have episode 2 coming out next Thursday, and I will catch you guys then. Thank you as always for the support.